So I'm Nicastro, managing editor for CMSWire here today at Forrester CX North America, the conference first in person in 3 years, and we're here with David Truog, VP Principal Analyst at Forrester. How's it going, David?
Doing well. How about you?
Good to be with you. Today, David, we're going to talk about digital acceleration. Obviously, it's been a huge topic the last 2 or 3 years, no question about it. You talk about opportunities with that, but also risk too. So I'm interested to hear, where you see the opportunities for customer experience leaders and where you see these risks.
Well, I think it's interesting because, as part of what we call the digital acceleration, there certainly have been a lot of new behaviors that consumers have engaged in. And of course, we've all heard about and talked about, shopping online, grocery shopping online, which prior to the pandemic had been less widespread. And we did see a big uptick in that during the pandemic for obvious reasons, especially among Gen Z. But interestingly, now, counterintuitively, the data is showing that people intend to shop less online after the pandemic. So wait, is that digital deceleration? What is it? On the other hand, we're seeing a real uptick in the use of some devices like smartwatches and smart speakers and augmented reality experiences on smartphones. And so what's that about? I think it's an interesting pattern in the three things I just mentioned, which is that they're in some ways more human-centric technologies. A smartwatch is something you wear on your body. A smart speaker is something you can talk to using natural language instead of clicking through menus or swiping. And augmented reality is a way of engaging with the physical world around you with a phone. So it's kind of a blended picture. It's a little more complex than just acceleration, right? There's a bit of both. So I think the challenge because of that for CX leaders is to think about how to make the most of this sort of uptick in interest in some of these more human-centric technologies. And there's a lot of complexity in them, and that is a challenge and a risk, right? There's a real opportunity because people are more likely to embrace technologies that fit better into their lives and into the human experience, into the way humans live, rather than things that force them to come to the technology. And I'd say there are two areas primarily where that's most the case right now. One is language AI and conversational interfaces, and the other is extended reality, which would include augmented, virtual, and mixed reality. And the reason for that is that with language interfaces, I think it's obvious. We like to talk. The way we interact with people, like at this conference and elsewhere, it would be annoying if we had to select from menus to communicate with each other, right? We don't like that. So natural language is great for that. And similarly, in VR and AR, being able to see things in 3 dimensions and manipulate them, interact with our hands is much more real and much more direct. People tend to focus on the visual because that's what they see screenshots of, but a big part of it is interacting with your hands as opposed to having to type or move a mouse. So those are promising. The problem is right now it's still relatively early days. Very fast progress, but anybody who's used a chatbot has to admit that most of them are terrible. It's just a fact. Long term, there's a lot of promise, but I think there was just sort of excess bullishness up front because it seems simple, right? Type some text into a box, get an answer. How hard can that be? It looks easy to design compared to a big complex interface, but in fact, behind the scenes, there's immense complexity because human language is very complex. And then when it comes to augmented reality and virtual reality also, those experiences are the kind of thing that companies just don't have a lot of expertise at creating. I mean, if you want to create a good website or a good app, that's well understood. There are people who are good at that. I mean, there are a lot of websites and apps that are not that good. But if you wanted to get it right, there are known ways to get it right, best practices. And
there's a playbook for implementation of CMSs and stuff like that.
Exactly. Whereas, things like conversational interfaces and extended reality, it's a bit more of a Wild West where people are figuring it out as they go. So although I was just harshing on chatbots a few minutes ago, at least the state of chatbots now, to some extent, it's understandable that a lot of them are not that great. Because it's early days and it's poorly understood for most people how to design them. There's a whole new discipline called conversation design that is about how to do this. And it's not just about, throwing some AI at the problem. That's important, but it's not enough.
Yeah, and you're talking about conversational AI, and I am hearing that this week in Nashville. I mean, I'm talking to practitioners at lunch yesterday, and I said, what's what's your focus right now? What do you want to potentially invest in? And they said conversational AI. These are folks that are leading contact centers. They're contact center managers. They're worried about agent retention, things like that. But I was thinking, deploying a chatbot. I mean, if you were to hire for a position in your company where that person's duties were to speak for your brand 24 hours a day to everyone on planet Earth at every second, how thoroughly would you vet that job candidate? Right?
Yes.
It's the same thing with these chatbots. That's what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of work internally before you roll out these functions.
Absolutely. It's a lot of work, and it's a different kind of work because one of the classic mistakes companies make is to create a chatbot, or some prefer to call it a virtual assistant, that asks, its opening gambit is, how can I help you today? Well, that's great from a human employee. That's a caring, welcoming thing to say. But for a chatbot, that's a terrible thing to say because that implies a sort of open-ended, the chatbot can do many things. And chatbots cannot do many things. They must be specialized, right? They have to have a small scope. One of the expressions I've heard that I think is good is your chatbot should be an island genius for now, and you should keep it that way. In other words, be really, really good at very few things.
Yeah.
For that, you don't want to say, how can I help you today? Or if you do, you have to say, here are the 3 things I can help you with, right?
Right, that'll be a lot easier. That would streamline things or maybe even say, how can I help you? And then in parentheses say, I probably won't be able to, and I'll send you to an FAQ or another human, hopefully.
Could be. The important thing is to set expectations properly. And, if you just open with, how can I help you today, with nothing more, you're setting very high expectations. And then if you can't meet those, it's much worse than if you had set low expectations in the first place.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. As a reporter and an editor looking at those websites, I would ask something like, "Yeah, I just want to find out where your headquarters are. Can they help us with that? Probably not, right?" But then you get customers who have nuanced things they need to do. Yeah, my billing cycle is messed up. I need you to fix that. And then what is the chatbot going to respond then?
Right.
Payment and billing? Like they'll send you to the page that
Right.
says payment and billing. So you're right.
Based on keyword detection.
Keyword
exactly.
detection, yeah.
Yeah.
Rules based.
And that's important when you're designing a chatbot and thinking about these assistants, is to really prioritize what are the simple things. First of all, just a few areas, and then within those areas, what are the simple things at first that don't involve connecting to a backend database and so on, but giving static information like hours of operation, or maybe the address of your headquarters might be a good one because that's relatively easy to recognize, but also frequency.
Yeah.
Like what's my balance if you're a bank?
Wanted to end on a metaverse related question because I think a lot of these things you're discussing here, David, today kind of lead into metaverse experiences like, extended reality and stuff like that. So give me the reality of metaverse experiences right now, 2022, versus I know Forrester talks about 2030s. There's going to be some actualities realized with the metaverse, but right now, 2022, if I'm a CX leader, what am I thinking? How do I get started if my brand thinks it's a good idea?
What exists now are metaverse precursors, not the actual metaverse. So what that means, though, is not that you shouldn't do anything about it, because we do believe it's coming, and there's a specific threshold for actually saying this is the metaverse. We could talk about that if you want, but I'll just focus on the here and now, which is that what I mean by metaverse precursors is 3D virtual worlds, like Horizon Worlds or Microsoft Mesh or Roblox or Altspace VR. And I deliberately am choosing examples that span from VR but also into AR. All of which give you 3D experiences that are more or less compelling. Some of them are pretty good, but, and this is a big qualifier, they're siloed. You can't move between them. That's going to be the difference between now and when we have something we really call the metaverse. It's a little bit like if the web were just made of a bunch of websites, but they could only link internally. We had my website and your website, but we couldn't link to each other. Would that be cool? Well, kind of, but not very useful compared to the web as we know it, of course. So what companies should be doing is experimenting inside of these metaverse precursors to get familiar with new skill sets, new processes, new creative processes, and then thinking more broadly about what are the kinds of things that customers and users actually want to do, where it would help to have a 3D experience, where it would help people to manipulate things in space as opposed to interacting with a 2D interface. companies.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking of, someone on the keynote stage yesterday talked about the metaverse basically is like another internet coming, right? It's another internet. And aren't we still trying to figure out how to provide experiences in this current internet, right? So it's like if you were to ask a CX leader, Forrester's in the business of research questions, right? If you were to ask a CX leader, how do you feel about the potential of the metaverse for your brand? Where do you think most of them would land? It's like scared, excited, uncertain. What's going to be that leading answer, you think?
So I speak with a lot of them, and there's a lot of, I would say, some scared, a lot of curious, and there is some sense of exhaustion. Because really, another thing. But I think it's a little bit like when smartphones came out and people were still trying to get their websites right for desktop and laptops. And then it's like, really, I need to deal with the mobile web. And of course, some companies said I'm not going to deal with it. Smartphones are flash in the pan, or at least, BlackBerry maybe, but we're not going to deal with these touchscreens. And others kind of saw the future and were able to prepare for it. Now, of course, nobody is certain that the metaverse, as I'm describing it, as Forrester's describing it, is going to be real. But we think so. We think that all the signals are pointing in that direction. And so it's smart to get ready. Not dump everything else you're doing in the same way that when you got ready for the mobile web, you didn't dump everything else. But get involved, conduct these experiments so that as it does become a reality, you're conversant. You have the skill sets. You have the people, the insight, and the understanding of the appropriate use cases to actually be able to survive and thrive in the metaverse.
David Truog, VP Principal Analyst of Forrester. Thanks for joining CMSWire today. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.